Oh my goodness, y'all. We moving into the next video. Moving in. Good morning, beautiful people. Good afternoon, good evening. No matter what time it is, just know this is the day that the Lord has made, and I will rejoice and be glad in it. As always, God is good, and He is good all the time.
Why did insane asylums suddenly
Let's go. Let's get this started. I'm going to rewind this. My freaking small dog, my Shih Tzu, vomited. So I had to clean this. What took me so long to go back.
Why did insane asylums suddenly explode across the Western world in the mid-1800s?
But, baby, look what you done to me. I'm trying to find the song. It is not letting me find it. But I'm going to play some music in the background so that way y'all could be all right, chilling. Okay?
Baby, girl, you're my love. Baby, God must have sent you from above. Sit close to me. I wanna sing about how much you really mean to me. Listen, lady,
I wanna say to you with every part of me. I got to say to you, you're everything I need.
I'm talking to you, girl.
You were made for me.
Baby,
you were made for me.
Listen, baby, look what we've come to be. Ever since the day, girl, time brought you to me. Baby, I'm glad to call you mine. Girl, you're so beautiful. I know they're looking all the time. But listen,
I wanna say to you,
Lord, I'm talking about that woman. I'm in love.
I got to say to you, you're everything I need.
Sit down, let's talk a while.
You were made for me.
I need to tell you,
you were made for me.
Girl, I'm in love.
You were made for me.
You're that lady.
You were made for me.
Girl, love the way you hold me. Love the way you kiss me. Girl, I'm just glad to see you with me. I want you to know you're the love of my soul. Ah, you baby.
You were made for me.
Ah, you baby.
You were made for me.
Talking to you, girl.
You were made for me.
You were made for me, girl.
You were made for me.
Girl, you're the blue bird.
You were made for me.
You landed in my tree.
You were made for me.
Girl, a good man.
You were made for me.
But I'm trying to be.
You were made for me.
Darling,
Darling,
girl.
you were made for me.
Darling, you. You, girl.
You were made for me.
Darling, you.
Darling,
You, girl.
you were made for me.
Y'all, I'm talking about the woman I love. I love heals me when I'm hurting, y'all.
You were made for me.
Oh, you babe.
You were made for me.
Oh, you babe.
You were made for me.
You were made for me.
You were made for me.
Y'all, I done messed around and got happy singing about the woman I love. Oh,
You were made for me.
I love you,
I
baby.
love you made for me.
I love you, baby.
I love you, baby.
Between 1845 and 1890, massive psychiatric institutions rose in nearly every major city. Enormous stone complexes built with impossible speed and filled almost immediately. Patient records are thin, testimonies vanished, stories dismissed as madness before they were heard. The official explanation is humanitarian reform, the rise of moral treatment, industrialization causing mental strain. But there's another possibility, one never taught, a recent global catastrophe,
Sky
a
blotted
lost
out.
world quietly erased and rebranded as myth. If such an event occurred, there would have been survivors, people whose memories didn't match the new official story. So the question is this: were the asylums really built to heal, or to disappear those who remembered what came before? In 1800, there were perhaps a dozen dedicated psychiatric institutions in all of North America. By 1880, there were over 300. In Britain, the number jumped from around 20 to over 120 in the same period. France, Germany, Russia, the pattern repeats with unsettling precision. Italy, Spain, the Austro-Hungarian territories, all experiencing the same explosive growth in psychiatric infrastructure within the same compressed time frame. This raises a simple but critical question. Where did all these patients come from? The
Right.
standard answer points to urbanization, poverty, the pressures of modern life. Industrial capitalism driving people mad. The dissolution of traditional community structures leaving vulnerable people without support. But here's where it gets strange. The asylum boom doesn't correlate neatly with industrialization. It happens earlier in some places, later in others. Rural areas with minimal industrial development built asylums just as large as those in Manchester or New York. Small towns, places with populations of 15,000 or 20,000, constructed institutions designed to hold 2,000
I really want to know why all these pictures, the sky is blotted out white.
patients. Communities with no factories, no urban density, no apparent source for mass mental illness. 2,000 patients from towns of 20,000. The math breaks, unless something else was happening. Unless the patients were coming from somewhere, or somewhen, that the official record refuses to acknowledge. Now consider this parallel timeline that official history treats as unrelated, coincidental, or, most often, non-existent. Between approximately 1750 and 1850, something happened to cities across the globe, something that left buildings half buried. Ground floors became basements, street levels rose, windows that once opened to streets now opened to soil and stone.
Wow.
Doorways designed for human passage now opened onto compressed earth and debris. We call it the mud flood. St. Petersburg, Paris, London, Boston, San Francisco, Melbourne, Buenos Aires, Edinburgh, Prague, Istanbul, cities that had no cultural contact, no shared engineering tradition, no coordinated urban planning, all showing the same architectural evidence of rapid burial, all displaying the same impossible uniformity of disruption. Buildings with ornate first-floor windows now underground, basement levels that were clearly designed as ground floors with ceiling heights and decorative elements that make no sense for cellars, doors that open to dirt, entire neighborhoods sitting 3 to 15 feet lower than the surrounding streets, and always the same absence of documentation explaining how or why this happened. Roughly 1800 to 1860, the same window when asylum construction exploded. So let me pose a question that sounds absurd until you sit with it. What do you do with the witnesses? If a civilization-altering event occurred, if cities were buried, if populations were displaced, if the physical landscape was fundamentally altered, there would be survivors. There would be people who remembered, people who could testify to what the world looked like before. People who remembered when those basement windows were ground floor entrances. People who insisted the streets were lower, the buildings taller, the architecture different. People who would contradict the new official narrative. Not criminals, not revolutionaries, not dangerous in any conventional sense. Dangerous only in what they knew, in what they remembered, in their refusal to accept the revised timeline, in their insistence that the world had changed in ways that couldn't be explained by gradual urban development. How do you silence testimony without obvious suppression? How do you recast massive historical disruption as myth, as delusion, as the ravings of disturbed minds? How do you make reality itself a symptom of madness? You build asylums. And that's where the asylum boom becomes impossible to ignore. Look at the institutions themselves, not just their number, though that's striking enough, but their design, their capacity, their architecture, the sheer monumental quality of structures supposedly built for the indigent mentally ill. These weren't medical facilities in any modern sense. They were containment structures, massive stone fortresses built with the same architectural techniques, and often by the same unknown builders as the monumental structures from the previous era. The era we're told didn't exist.
Giants.
The era that supposedly ended before it began.
Yeah, the Giants built
Buildings
it,
constructed with precision stonework,
hide.
with sophisticated ventilation systems, with architectural elements that mirror the old world style found in the half-buried buildings themselves. The Kirkbride Plan, introduced in 1854 by Thomas Story Kirkbride, became the template for asylum construction across North America. Enormous batwing structures, symmetrical, imposing, built of stone and brick, with a craftsmanship that seems inconsistent with the supposed capabilities of mid-19th century America. These weren't simple institutional buildings, they were architectural monuments, often featuring the same ornate stonework, the same advanced construction techniques, the same impossible precision we see in structures officially attributed to an earlier or non-existent civilization. But here's the strangest part. Many of these buildings didn't just appear suddenly in the historical record. They appeared complete, fully operational, with patient populations that materialized almost immediately. No construction photographs, no building progress reports, just sudden existence, as if they'd been there all along, simply repurposed from some previous function. Where did those patients come from? The records are vague. The wandering poor, the deranged, those of unsound mind, persons without settlement. But the descriptions are oddly uniform, not specific diagnoses, not detailed case histories, just removal, institutionalization, permanent separation from society. The language carefully avoiding specifics, as if the true reasons for commitment couldn't be written down. This is where the pattern becomes harder to explain away. Asylum construction wasn't a regional phenomenon. It wasn't one nation responding to local conditions. It was global, and it was coordinated, not through explicit international treaty. No single document mandates worldwide psychiatric institutionalization, but through a pattern so uniform it implies centralized planning.
Are most of the patients women?
Not explicitly. There's no smoking gun document saying build asylums everywhere simultaneously. But the timing, the architecture, the stated purposes, the legal frameworks enabling involuntary commitment, all emerging in the same narrow historical window across continents, across cultures that supposedly had minimal contact. The same Kirkbride-style layouts appearing in Russia and Argentina, the same commitment criteria emerging in Britain and Australia, the same expansion of diagnostic categories happening simultaneously in societies with radically different medical traditions. Britain passes the Lunacy Act in 1845, mandating asylum construction in every county. France enacts similar legislation the same year. The United States sees state after state pass commitment laws throughout the 1840s and 1850s. Russia, Germany, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, all implementing psychiatric institutionalization on an unprecedented scale. Japan begins constructing Western-style asylums in the 1870s, despite having no prior tradition of institutional psychiatry. The Ottoman Empire follows suit. Even colonial territories in Africa and Asia see asylum construction, often before basic hospitals or schools, all at once,
Globalism.
all without acknowledging coordination, all while pretending this was spontaneous humanitarian reform happening independently across dozens of nations, all using remarkably similar architectural plans, similar legal language, similar justifications for involuntary detention. The official history treats this as convergent evolution, similar problems producing similar solutions. Progressive reform spreading naturally through cultural exchange, medical knowledge diffusing through professional journals and international conferences. But convergent evolution doesn't produce identical architecture. It doesn't produce identical legal language. It doesn't produce simultaneous construction timelines in regions with drastically different governmental structures, economic conditions, and cultural values. It doesn't explain why a small town in rural Pennsylvania and a provincial city in Siberia would build virtually identical psychiatric facilities in the same decade, using the same design principles serving the same apparent function. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Now consider what happened to psychiatric diagnosis during this period. Before 1840, insanity was a relatively narrow category. Severe mental disruption, violent behavior, profound cognitive impairment, conditions so obvious and extreme that commitment was rarely controversial. But between 1840 and 1880, the definition exploded. Suddenly, almost anything could qualify as madness requiring institutionalization. The diagnostic criteria...
Not for nothing, but one of my great-grandmothers was labeled insane. And then she had like some catatonic, I forget what it was called, but it's something where like her body was like immobilized, like kind of stuck. It's crazy.
expanded to encompass behaviors and beliefs that would have been considered eccentric or unusual in prior decades, but not necessarily pathological. Religious enthusiasm encompassed behaviors and beliefs that would have been considered eccentric or unusual in prior decades, but not necessarily pathological. Religious enthusiasm, political radicalism, unconventional behavior. Moral insanity, a diagnosis so vague it could apply to anyone who defied social norms. Nostalgia, literally homesickness, became a committable condition. Drapetomania, the supposed mental illness that caused enslaved people to flee, was seriously proposed as a psychiatric disorder. Monomania, obsessive focus on a single topic, could justify institutionalization. Particularly, it seems, when that single topic was historical inconsistency or architectural anomaly. Reading the case files that survive is disturbing, not because of the patient's conditions, but because of how thin the justifications often were. A woman who claimed her city used to look different, a man insisting he remembered buildings that didn't exist, people describing a different timeline, a different architectural landscape, a different history. Individuals who couldn't reconcile the buried first floors with the official explanations. People asking questions about why the streets had risen, why so many structures showed evidence of burial, why the historical record seemed discontinuous. Delusional, the doctor.
Where people are constantly asking authority figures, what is going on? Why is things the way that they are? They bring their concerns, their gripes, their complaints, and then they find that nothing changed. And if any change occurs, it's change that's in the adverse direction. It's change that leads to what is presumed as fascism. It's the government and politics taking over and invading your home, your privacy. You feel like you have no rights to even scratch your butt when it's itchy.
Has concluded, suffering from false memories, detached from reality, exhibiting confabulation, experiencing temporal disorientation. These became standardized diagnoses, appearing with suspicious frequency in asylum records from the 1840s through 1870s. But what if their reality was simply different from the newly constructed official narrative? This is where the evidence becomes absence, where the pattern reveals itself through what's missing. Try to find detailed personal accounts from asylum patients in the 1850s through 1870s. Try to find their testimony,
Bleak.
their version of events, their descriptions of the world they remembered, their explanations for why they believed what they believed in their own words, unfiltered by institutional interpretation. The records are sparse, heavily filtered through institutional authorities, and where they do exist, they're dismissed as the products of disordered minds. Patient testimony was transcribed by asylum staff, interpreted through the lens of psychiatrists. They're dismissed as the products of disordered minds. Patient testimony was transcribed by asylum staff, interpreted through the lens of psychiatric diagnosis, and preserved only when it confirmed the institution's assessment of madness. Direct patient writings were often destroyed as therapeutically counterproductive. But dismissal isn't the same as evidence of falsehood. The deeper I went into asylum records, the more I noticed systematic gaps. Patient admissions with no accompanying documentation of their previous lives. People institutionalized with no clear family connections, no established residence, no paper trail suggesting they existed before the moment they entered the asylum. Names without histories, identities without context, just dates of admission and vague descriptions of symptomology, as if they appeared from nowhere, or as if their previous existence had been erased, as if records had been deliberately purged, as if these were people who needed to disappear from the historical record entirely, leaving no trace of who they were or what they knew. What haunts me most isn't what the records say, it's what they don't say. There's no discussion of the contradiction, no acknowledgement that something strange is happening. The 19th century medical establishment treats the sudden explosion of mental illness as natural, expected, unremarkable. No medical journals question why psychiatric pathology appears to be increasing exponentially. No public health officials investigate the cause of this apparent epidemic. Thousands of people across Europe and North America suddenly going mad, requiring permanent institutionalization, displaying symptoms that often centered on false memories, temporal confusion.
What are these lights in the background? The one time it's not like completed, blotted out, but there's these little dots.
And
the whites are bright, and it's crazy, but it's just so dusty. Let's continue going.
Distance that the physical world had changed, all within the same narrow time frame, all exhibiting remarkably similar delusions about architectural anomalies and historical discontinuity. And the response? Not investigation, not curiosity about why this particular cluster of symptoms appeared simultaneously across vast geographic distances, not epidemiological study of what might cause such a specific and widespread pattern of mental disruption, just commitment, containment, silence, immediate institutionalization, permanent separation from society, and a remarkable lack of medical curiosity about the phenomenon itself. The asylums filled, and the mud flood became myth. The witnesses became patients, the testimony became symptom, and the questions became evidence of madness. Return to the buildings themselves. Many 19th century asylums show the same half-buried characteristics as other structures from the period. First floors below ground level, windows opening to soil. The same evidence of rapid burial we see in civic buildings, churches, train stations, the Danvers State Hospital in Massachusetts, the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum in West Virginia, the Athens Lunatic Asylum in Ohio, all showing foundations that suggest they either predated the mud flood event or were constructed immediately after, on ground that had recently risen. But unlike those other structures, asylums weren't typically celebrated as architectural achievements. They weren't featured in the same way. They were built, filled, and quietly forgotten. No grand opening ceremonies, no architectural journals celebrating their design, just functional construction notes and rapid patient admission, until they were abandoned. And when they were abandoned, throughout the 20th century as psychiatric care shifted to other models, what happened to the records? What happened to the patient testimonies, the admission documents, the case files, the detailed daily logs that should have documented decades of institutional operation? Destroyed, lost, inaccessible, fire damage, water damage, deliberately disposed of as outdated medical records, or simply missing, with no explanation for their absence. The destruction often occurred immediately before the buildings were repurposed or demolished, as if someone didn't want those records surviving into an era when independent researchers might access them. The silence was deafening. I can't prove what happened. I can only show you what doesn't make sense. The synchronicity, the scale, the vagueness of patient origins, the expansion of diagnostic criteria to include memory discrepancies and historical confusion. The architectural evidence suggesting the asylums themselves emerged from, or were buried by, the same event they may have been built to suppress. The systematic destruction of records, the global coordination, the impossible speed of construction, the immediate filling of institutions before any local population could have generated sufficient need. Why did the asylum boom happen precisely when the mudflood timeline suggests catastrophic disruption? Why were commitment criteria expanded to include symptoms that sound remarkably like testimony to a different historical reality? Why were these institutions built with such urgency, such uniformity, such capacity, as if they were needed all at once, everywhere? As if someone knew in advance that large numbers of people would need to be institutionalized simultaneously across the globe.
Because they
Why
knew,
do the patient records from this era
they knew that there was going to be people apprehensive to the change and they was going to have to coerce it.
remain so difficult to access, so fragmentary, so carefully filtered through institutional authority? Why were so many destroyed, and why does that destruction follow such a consistent pattern? Why has this pattern, this correlation between geological disruption and psychiatric institutionalization, been so thoroughly ignored by mainstream historical inquiry? Why does mentioning this correlation immediately invite dismissal, not on evidential grounds, but on the basis that the question itself is inherently unreasonable? Not why the asylums were built, not when they were built, not under which legal frameworks, no. How do you erase a civilization? How do you rewrite history on a global scale? How do you silence witnesses without obvious violence? How do you make the truth itself a symptom of madness? You declare them mad, you institutionalize the memory itself, you build the asylums, and the evidence suggests something much larger than mental health reform.
And then you strip them from the younger generations and you prevent them from potentially spreading any stories word of mouth, and you prevent the same thing that you were trying to stop from spreading, you prevent it by separating families and all this other stuff. That's how they do. The same thing that they doing now. Through incarceration, placing yokes on our necks, strongholds on us that they wouldn't even have placed on themselves.
Something that required the simultaneous construction of containment infrastructure across the globe. Something that needed the testimony suppressed, the witnesses removed, the alternative narrative pathologized. Something that couldn't be accomplished through obvious censorship or violence, but required the authority of medical science to legitimize the erasure. The official history says humanitarian progress, medical advancement, the evolution of psychiatric care.
You always
The
need an
enlightened
official
response to
justification.
mental illness, the triumph of reason over superstition. But the architectural evidence, the timeline, the systematic gaps in the historical record, they whisper something else. They whisper a truth that had to be buried as thoroughly as the first floors of those half-submerged buildings. They whisper, these were the witnesses. And we built fortresses to hold them. We diagnosed their memories. We institutionalized their reality. We made truth itself a treatable condition.
Man. These are conversations that need to be had. I encourage you, I implore you to spread conversations, man. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Let me know what y'all think about this. If y'all have any recommendations or any requests, put them in. Let me know. I love y'all. God bless and peace.